With only 4 games left to play, the Seahawks have underachieved this season and currently are on the outside looking in the playoff race. Which players, coaches, and personnel men have the most at stake? We're going to be taking a heat check today on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined for our Blue Friday episode by my co-host, Nick Lee. And a special thanks to all the 12s out there, whether you are listening from St. George, Utah, or Vincennes, Indiana. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you that makes Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We are getting into the pressure cooker that is the last 4 games of the season. The Seahawks have underachieved to this point. That is putting a lot of players, coaches, and even people in the front office on a bit of a hot seat. We're going to look at a temperature watch here on today's episode. Plus, as we always do on our Blue Friday episode, keys to victory against the Eagles, picks to click, game predictions, loaded episode, and it is coming your way courtesy of LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Now for your lead story here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Usually we would be diving into the injury report, but with the Seahawks playing on Monday night, they are only midway through their practice week. We aren't going to get the final injury report until Saturday afternoon. And given the fact the Seahawks are currently outside of the playoff race with the number 9 spot in the NFC, much lower than we expected out of this football team, there's been a lot of discussion about which coaches, which players, which people in the front office may be on the hot seat. And so we are going to pull out our thermometer here, Nick, and we're going to play a little bit of temperature watch with a number of key pieces in the Seahawks team, whether they're players, coaches, personnel men. You get the first honors here, and this is going to all be at random. Temperature watch. What is the temperature looking like right now, Nick, for DK Metcalf?
Well, he has that game against Dallas, and all of a sudden it's snowmageddon, in January that for his seat. He's got all the ability in the world, setting Deron Bland on fire pretty much. And then he gets yet another ejection against the Niners, his 4th, I think, 15-yard penalty of the season. Rumors are out there that the Niners were kind of goading him, and he's easy to goat into that kind of stuff. I'd like to say for his seat, it's a nice sunset on Moonlight Beach back home for me in San Diego. It's a little warm, but there's an ocean breeze, which is, his top 10 talent and abilities. So it's not so hot, but I don't need a hoodie anymore. It's just a t-shirt and shorts. So it's not that far away. I wouldn't call it hot, but it's a nice, beach, sunset kind of weather. So it's getting there. I'm going to go 75 range, just with all of his talent and ability. And he's been here in the program so long, but just the antics are becoming too much.
All right, here coming up next, my first temperature watch. And those of you watching on YouTube, you'll see that we have indexed this with the many expressions of Pete Carroll as well. I've got Geno Smith staying on the offensive side of the football. And Nick, I don't think that this seat is necessarily on fire at this point, but it's whatever is right below that, just because of the contract situation. The Seahawks structured this contract when they extended Geno Smith back in March to make it that they had a pretty easy out after the first season. And so these next 4 games, Geno Smith, it sounds like he's got a good chance to be back in action against the Eagles. I'm going to say right now he's at that 90-degree mark on our thermometer, where it's pretty uncomfortable in Seattle when it gets to 90 degrees. It doesn't do it often, but there's still time for him to be able to go into survival mode here and put together 4 really good games. And maybe he's still your starting quarterback next season, but there's certainly room to improve for him in an up and down season. That hasn't all been on him. It hasn't all been his fault, but I certainly think that this is a situation where the seat is pretty darn warm. All right, let's get back to our see who for his next one. And Oh boy, we're going to the coaching staff here. Clint Hurtt, second-year defensive coordinator for the Seahawks. What's the temperature looking like, Nick, for Clint Hurtt?
Well, I just looked, the proof's in the pudding. Jamal Adams has been a disaster. Defensive line has been hit and miss. Darrell Taylor's development has been, he hasn't quite bloomed like we'd hoped. And, the regression of guys like Quandre Diggs, some of the issues in coverage, putting guys out of position, like Bobby Wagner and the linebackers, and just not putting guys in positions of success. Defense hasn't been good for 5+ years, and that's not all on Clint Hurtt. But his 2 years as defensive coordinator, Seahawks ranked 25th and 26th in points per game allowed and 26th and 28th in yards per game allowed, which are inexcusable with that kind of talent. I'm going to say it's like peak summer July. It's not quite, inevitable, apocalyptic heat, but the boats are out on Lake Washington, and Hurt, unfortunately, might need to fire one up too and go fishing because he might not be defensive coordinator for too long. I'm going to go in that nice, late July 90-degree summer range.
I'm going to be shifting gears from the coaching staff to the front office here. John Schneider up next here on the Temperature Watch. And this is one of the few people that is going to be on this game today, Nick, that I can confidently say that it's a nice, cold day for John Schneider. I do not think John Schneider has been the issue. Look at the talent that he's brought in the draft the last 2 years. The free agent additions, Draymond Jones has not worked out quite as well as they hoped, although he's playing better the last couple of weeks, at least in my opinion. I like a lot of the other moves they made, bringing back Jaron Reed, getting Mario Edwards, Julian Love starting to play better. I think when you look at the grand scheme of things, John Schneider has had a really good run here the last couple of years with what he's been able to do with all those draft picks. So I think he is in a nice, cold situation. He's probably sporting a winter coat at this point. I think he is pretty darn safe for the Seahawks. Up next here for Nick, and we've got to go to the defense, Jamal Adams, and I can only imagine where this one is going.
Well, I'll tell you who won't need a winter coat. I'll say that much. Jamal Adams, statistically one of the 10 worst safeties in football in most categories. Plus, he's honestly a knucklehead. I mean, he's the poster child for what Pete does not want in his locker room, a reckless, kind of unhinged, undisciplined veteran who's a terrible example for these young guys that you mentioned, Schneider has brought in, especially in that secondary. At least DK puts up numbers, but Jamal doesn't. And his seat is that one day I had in Silverwood in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho a few years ago, where people were passing out in line and it was 107 degrees and people were fighting over shaded spots. Jamal Adams, it is on fire. And just, I hate it because he's so talented, but that's just where we're at right now. It is on fire, and, it's heat strokes. It's heat stroke city right now.
My next person that I'm going to be looking at from the Temperature Watch standpoint, it's going to feel like 2021 when we had 3 straight days in Seattle area where it was 110 plus degrees, and that is Shane Waldron. There's no other way to evaluate. It's similar to Jamal Adams in the sense that it's year 3 for Shane Waldron. You've got one of the best receiving corps in the NFL. You have a quarterback that was a Pro Bowler last year. You have 2 second-round running backs. You've got an ascending young offensive line. And yes, there's been some injuries. You've got 3 tight ends that are really good, one of the best tight end groups in the NFL. And yet this offense, for most of the season, aside from a few exceptions like in Dallas, it has been a really poor offense most of the season. They haven't been able to move the football on third down. They're 28th running the football in a Pete Carroll coached football team. He has been a huge disappointment. I haven't seen the adjustments. I haven't seen the ability to adapt to what defenses are doing. That even showed up at the end of the Cowboys game when they put up 35 points. Those lack of adjustments. Year 3 as an offensive coordinator, you should not be having those issues. He should have grown into this position, and I've seen nothing but regression. And your last one here, Nick, this is the one that I think our listeners are going to be most interested to see your viewpoint on. What's the Temperature Watch look like for Pete Carroll, who is actually the poster child of our thermometer on this game?
Well, look, like I mentioned, the defense hasn't been good in over 5 years. That's a Pete thing. You mentioned some of the shortfalls of the running game. That's a Pete thing. Might be looking at another year of coordinator changes. And now even the culture looks shot, which is shocking for a Pete Carroll team. The bulk of these players don't look like they're buying in. There's, yelling on the sidelines. There's the Jamal Adams disaster. the doubling down, the DK Metcalf stuff. This might be a crazy offseason for long tenured head coaches. Pete Carroll, Bill Belichick, even Mike Tomlin in Pittsburgh. I'm going to go. I think he's chilling with DK Metcalf in my hometown, Moonlight Beach in Encinitas, California, where, it's not quite, take off all your clothes and jump in the ocean kind of hot, but it's, you don't need a hoodie. And it's a comfortable sunset weather on the beach with a little breeze still. You especially if you win this game, then all of a sudden you might need to put the hoodie back on. But certainly it's not cold and it's not quite heat stroke, but it's definitely like comfortable beach weather.
For my last one here on our temperature watch, we're sticking at the safety group with another player that is making a lot of money in Quandre Diggs. And this one is more complicated for me than a lot of these, because I don't think that a lot of the coverage issues the Seahawks have had this year fall on Quandre Diggs. Teams are still not testing them very often down the seam or with post routes, because Quandre Diggs is still one of the very best center fielders in football. But I've got to go in the 90-degree range where it's uncomfortably hot. And there's two reasons why. A lot of missed tackles. That has been a huge problem for him this year. And he's normally been a good tackler. That has been problematic. And two, he's going into the last year of his contract with a cap hit north of $20 million. He is not playing anywhere close to that level right now as he had the previous 3 seasons when he was a Pro Bowler. We haven't seen the interceptions. Some of it's been the quarterbacks just aren't testing him, but still, it has been an average season at best for him. You're not paying for that. He's past 30 years old, so I do think that the seat is pretty darn warm for him, and he needs a strong finish here to solidify his standing being on this roster in 2024. Coming up next, we're going to have our keys to victory. Seahawks facing off against the Eagles on Monday Night Football. Don't go away. You're listening to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. When you're hiring for your small business and you want to have top-tier candidates to interview, you've got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. When I was a site manager, LinkedIn Jobs was my go-to to post writing positions to land top candidates, and they made the process easy and seamless. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn offers a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. Thankfully, with LinkedIn, the process is intuitive, quick, and it's easy. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. You're listening to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined by my co-host, Nick Lee. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Don't forget, coming up on Monday, we're going to have a special post-game. It's going to be late, but it's a Monday night post-game. Game balls, 3 up, 3 down. Key storylines coming out of the game. You name it. We'll have all of it here on a live show, hopefully covering a Seahawks victory. You won't want to miss it. This undoubtedly, Nick, is a massive game for the Seattle Seahawks coming up on Monday night. If they want any opportunity to crawl back into one of those wild card spots, this feels like a game that they've got to have because it's an NFC opponent. They need to improve their record there to match up with some of the tiebreakers that they could potentially be facing. And this is an Eagles team that's got a bit of desperation as well. They've lost their last 2 games, and now they are in the 5 seed spot. They're a wild card with the Dallas Cowboys holding the tiebreaker now in the NFC East. So they were the number 1 seed a few weeks ago. Now they're number 5. So there's a lot at stake for both these teams going into this game. The Seahawks have lost 4 straight, Nick. How do they get back in the win column against an Eagles team that's going to have a chip on its shoulder, that's looking to right the ship themselves? Offensively, what do the Seahawks need to do?
Well, I think one of the biggest advantages the Seahawks have is the talents in their receiver room. Of course, DK Metcalf, Lockett, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. You got to find ways, Shane Waldron, to put them in positions of success and put the defensive backs of the Eagles in positions of conflict. Now, you've heard that with like the Shane Waldron, Sean McVay, kind of Shanahan kind of offenses where, you kind of have to make defensive backs pick their poison and hurt them when they do. And Darius Slay's having a down year for his standards. James Bradbury, I think if Eagles fans could go down the chimney at Christmas night, he'd be getting a lump of coal in his stocking. He might be lucky if he gets just that from Eagles fans. But Bradley Roby has trouble tackling from the slot. So I think you got to put them in positions of conflict with your talented wide receivers and really take advantage of the passing game. The Eagles have been just a sieve on defense, especially against the pass. Deep balls, take advantage of the. I think the if there's one singular advantage the Seahawks have, it's the talent at the wide receiver position versus their defensive secondary against their secondary.
And the Eagles also have a really poor linebacking group. And some of that's been because of the free agent defections that they had this offseason. They decided to go cheap. They were rolling with Nakobe Dean, second-year linebacker out of Georgia, believing he was going to take a big step forward, and he injures his foot, has Lisfranc surgery, so he's not going to be available in this game. So it's been rough sledding for the Philadelphia Eagles in the middle, and I've talked about this quite a bit this week, but I am going to continue to emphasize this. Even though you've got those star receivers on the outside, utilize your secondary weapons, your running backs, your tight ends in the passing game to take advantage of that linebacking group. And you could put Jackson Smith and Jigma and Tyler Lockett in this category as well, because getting those guys on crossers and drag routes, getting them working the middle of the field to try to take advantage of these linebackers, to me, that is going to be crucial for this Seahawks team to be able to win this football game, because the Eagles do have a really good front line that can get after the quarterback. They're in the top 10 in basically every notable metric rushing the passer. You're not going to have time to take a lot of deep dropbacks to try to chuck the ball downfield against a secondary that has been suspect on big plays. You're not going to get a lot of opportunities to do that, but you can carve this defense up in the middle of the field, getting their linebackers in position where they have to cover against athletic tight ends and running backs. So again, Shane Waldron, this is not rocket science. You can see the film, you can see the stats, you can see the players that are out there on the field. Those linebackers, they should be the rats that you are attacking this week, and get those tight ends and running backs involved in the passing game. It's going to open things up, just like the run game sometimes does for deep balls. That's going to open up those opportunities for Metcalf, Lockett, and Smith and Jigba on the outside downfield.
And then, of course, as we usually circle back to the run game, and with the Eagles, when they allow 85 plus rushing yards to a team, they're 3-3, and then do the math, they're 7-0 when they hold a team under 85 rushing yards. So I think certainly, you'd like to get into the triple digits, but at least getting to 85, and especially when Ken Walker's working himself back, I'd love to see him get 15, 17 carries plus, and Zach Charbonnet in there too. Kind of mixing it in, because we always talk about, if there's one way to keep a very talented offense kind of at bay, which the Eagles are, is keep them on the sidelines and run the ball, run that clock, turn that clock, have sustained drives. So 85 plus rushing yards to kind of put yourself in position of success, and at least at very worst, that number keeps the game close late in the game to where you can take a shot, maybe win.
And you're hoping that means that you've gotten a lot of plays in, and you've had the football, you've kept it out of Jalen Hurts' hands. So there's a little bit of defensive mechanism with that run game as well. We were just talking the explosives for the Seahawks, and the Eagles have given up a ton. These defenses mirror each other in a lot of ways when you watch the film, and it maybe shouldn't be surprising, because Sean Desai is now the defensive coordinator for the Eagles, and he was basically an assistant head coach for the Seahawks last year before going to Philadelphia, and was heavily involved in their defense. So maybe it's not a surprise that the Eagles have had issues giving up big plays, and the Seahawks have had issues giving up big plays. You look at the talent that the Eagles have at that receiving group. A.J. Brown, to me, is a top 3, top 5 receiver. He is an absolute stud. Devontae Smith is also a fantastic receiver. Two totally different receivers stylistically, but they both put up big numbers. They get a lot of big chunk plays downfield. Jalen Hurts takes those shots. And so we saw what happened in that 49ers game a week ago, Nick. The Seahawks have got to find a way to really button up this passing game. Don't let them beat you with chunk plays, especially no pass plays of 40-plus yards. It felt like the 49ers were just doing that at will last week. If you're giving up big plays like that to this Eagles offense, it's going to be a really long Monday night.
Yeah, another just weird thing with a Pete Carroll-led team you don't see. Just keep that umbrella up. It might rain on Monday. Keep that umbrella up and make him nickel and dime you instead of going over the top. Yeah, Both A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith rank in the top 15 for wide receiver grades when targeted 20-plus yards downfield. A.J. Brown tied for the second most contested catches of at least 20 yards. So, yeah, you got to keep that umbrella up because they are going to try to take some shots. And Jalen Hurts, keep making him uncomfortable is huge. He's got a 96.7 passer rating when he's not blitzed, and it drops to 86.7 when he's blitzed. And he's not the best play-action quarterback. That's not really what the Eagles do a ton. He's got an 85.9 passer rating when he, in play action. But it's going to be tough to get a straight pass rush because Pro Football Focus just released their offensive line rankings, and I do believe I saw the Eagles at number 1. So they are a fantastic offensive line. Number 5 in pass block win rate. Jason Kelce, of course, still one of the best, if not the best center in football. So easier said than done category for making Hurts uncomfortable and flushing him out of the pocket with such a solid offensive line.
Yeah, he has not been near as effective this year, in part because he's been dealing with a knee bruise for most of the season. He just hasn't been quite 100%, not close, actually, and he's been playing through that injury, so he has not been as accurate when he's been outside of the pocket. Teams have had success when they have been able to do that and force him to extend plays, which is surprising because last year that was really strength for him. But as you mentioned, there is a Kelce in this game, but it is not the one in Kansas City, so we're not going to be talking about Taylor Swift, but we're going to be talking about a really dynamic running back for the Eagles that they got from the Lions, DeAndre Swift, who is a fantastic talent. And this guy can do a lot of damage catching the football as well as running the football. And the Eagles, when they have gotten at least 75 all-purpose yards from Swift this year, they're undefeated. And so the Seahawks got to find a way to really contain him both as a runner and a receiver, get Swift under 75 yards, keep him at bay, and that really improves the Seahawks' chances of winning this football game.
Yeah, the Cowboys and 49ers both held him under 40 scrimmage yards, which is very impressive. Of course, both of those being blowout losses for the Eagles, blowout wins for those two. So yeah, that seems like a pretty big formula is keeping Swift at bay. Because if you're allowing the Eagles to hit downfield with skinny Batman and swole Batman, as they call A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, and then you're letting DeAndre Swift run around. I mean, that is a recipe to not just lose, but get your doors blown off by this team that is going to be playing angry.
Yeah, there's no question about it. That both these teams should have chips on their shoulder. You can look at it from one standpoint of view, the Seahawks like, oh no, they've lost their last 2. They're going to be angry, but you've lost your last 4, and you are the team that's out of the playoffs right now. So desperation should be on your side. Coming up next, we're going to dish out our picks to click and our game predictions here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Now for a word from our sponsor, BetterHelp. Life can be full of twists and turns and throw a few wrenches at you at unexpected times, so it's important to lead yourself through it all and put a focus on your mental health. BetterHelp Online Therapy will assess your needs and can match you with your own licensed professional therapist in less than 48 hours. Therapy worked wonders for me over the past year when I was struggling to deal with family-related health issues, but don't just take my word for it. Having someone in your corner to guide you when you're struggling to navigate obstacles is absolutely invaluable. It's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It's professional therapy done securely and available to people worldwide. With therapy, it can take a few tries to find the right fit for you. BetterHelp is a great way to invest in yourself, and BetterHelp has a special offer for our listeners. Get 10% off your first month at BetterHelp.com/lockedon. That's 10% off your first month of online therapy at BetterHelp.com/lockedon. You're listening to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. It's your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined by my co-host, Nick Lee. A special thanks to all the 12s out there. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you, covering sports 24/7 with the top stories of the day. Local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, Nick, we've got this massive game coming up on Monday Night Football, the first game ever to be flexed from Sunday to Monday night. We get to see the Seahawks host the Eagles under the lights in prime time, a game with major playoff ramifications for both teams, especially the Seahawks are just trying to get back into that top 7 so they can extend their season past week 18. let's talk picks to click. Last week was kind of a mixed bag for me. I finally got good numbers from Noah Fant. He got a 20-plus yard catch at least. No touchdown still, but at least got some production. On defense, Jordan Brooks played, so Devin Bush didn't get a chance to put up any numbers. But sometimes you got to take your gambles and roll the dice a little bit when you're making your picks to click. But on offense, who do you think is the player to watch as the pick to click this week going up against this Eagles defense that has been pretty generous in recent games?
Well, I know I just described his seats as like a day at the beach, but DK Metcalf has absolutely torched the Eagles. His last 2 games against the Eagles, I know it's over as an extended period of time. His last 2 games against the Eagles, 17 catches for 337 yards in 2 games, including that monster game in that 2019 NFC wildcard round. So the Eagles defense straight up stinks. I mean, I'm sorry. And, my dad who's an Eagles fan will tell you, he'll be the first one to tell you they stink. Excited to see what message DK Metcalf brings to us and sign language when he gets into the end zone. I'm going to go 7 catches for 113 yards, his 3rd straight 100-plus yard game against the Eagles, who really, I think, I forget who it was for the Eagles, I think it might have been Slay, who said that he still sees that, he still sees DK Metcalf in his nightmare. So it's a big, it could be a big game for DK.
I'm going to go with a tight end for another game, and I just keep rolling that dice. Last week, I got a little bit of production out of Noah Fant. Colby Parkinson caught a 25-yard touchdown last week, so maybe that means that he's had his touchdown for the season, but I'm banking on another one in this game. And again, it just goes back to who the matchup is against. This Eagles team, the safeties haven't been great, even after trading for Kevin Byard. That move's helped them a little bit, but this has still been a group that's given up a lot of big plays. The linebackers that I've talked about all week, it's not that I'm taking shots at them necessarily, but they have not been good, especially in coverage. This has been a position group that's been quite vulnerable against bigger receivers and tight ends. The Seahawks need to take advantage of that. This should be a game where I'm not saying force feeding, but you got to scheme up ways to get Colby Parkinson the football. And I think they will. 3 catches, 56 yards. I think he finds the end zone for a 2nd consecutive week. Now on the defensive side of the ball, the Eagles have played as a top 5 offense for most of this season. They have struggled as of late to finish drives, but this is still an offense that is loaded with talent led by A.J. Brown, Smith. They've got a number of good running backs. They've got an outstanding offensive line. Jalen Hurts has still put up really good numbers, even with the injury he's been playing through. Who is the defensive player that you think has to have a big game for the Seahawks to be able to pull off the upset on Monday night?
Well, I'm thinking what the Eagles are going to probably try to do is establish dominance with that offensive line and the run game, and utilizing the tight ends. Dallas Goedert is back. I'm going to go Jordan Brooks. I think if he has coming off the injury, I'm hoping he's rested up, ready to go, and he plays in this game and plays well, because he's going to be put in a lot of spots to make plays with the players that the Eagles have. Like I mentioned, with Swift and Goddard and even Jalen Hurts when he takes off and runs. Jalen Hurts is a load to bring down. That is a strong man at quarterback. So Jordan Brooks is going to be tested a lot, and 11 tackles, a sack, and a forced fumble. You put up those kind of numbers with Jordan Brooks, I think that your defense is going to be in a good spot.
Yeah, I'm going to go with a pass rusher for my pick to click. And you mentioned how good this Eagles offensive line is. Their tackles are outstanding. Lane Johnson's still one of the best right tackles in the sport. Jordan Mailata on the other side has gone from being a experimental former rugby player into one of the better left tackles in the league. So it's not going to be easy, but boy, Mafe is overdue now. It feels like it's been 3 months since he had a sack, with that streak that he had 7 straight games with a sack. And there have been some promising rushes from him. They have not translated into quarterback hits and sacks in recent weeks. I feel like this is a game that Boye Mafe, though, is going to kind of have that re-coming out party a little bit, because the Eagles' offensive line, as good as they are, they have not played well up to their standards the last couple of weeks. And the Seahawks do have some explosive edge rushers. I feel like, especially if Mafe is going up against Mailata, I think that is a matchup that he can win fairly regularly because of his skill set. I think he's the kind of guy that's got enough power to go with speed that he can create some issues for Mailata over there. So I'm going to go with 1.5 sacks. I think he gets to Hurts, who does hold on to the ball too long sometimes. And so that is an area where the pass rush can take advantage of that. Can you get into the backfield, get to him, create some havoc in the pocket? The Eagles have had some issues with that as of late. So I'm rolling the dice on Boye Mafe to have a big game. Now let's get to the predictions. The Seahawks are only 3.5-point underdogs at home in this game. I thought that total would be a little higher, but the Eagles are not playing very good football right now. So it's understandable why maybe the bettors out there are thinking this is going to be a closer game maybe than people anticipate looking at the records. How do you see the Seahawks stacking up, and do they have a chance to actually win this game on Monday night?
Well, first of all, I'll be there. I can't wait. I have never been to a Monday Night Football game before, so I can't be more excited for this. It's a family affair. My dad's from Philly, so this will be fun. I think the primetime magic is gone. Whatever the Seahawks had for the last decade plus, I'm done talking about it. I'm done using it as it's like, oh, the primetime magic, Pete Carroll. Besides, of course, Thursday night against Dallas. Other than that, like they got their doors blown off on Thanksgiving. And the Eagles, you could argue, are almost just as desperate. And I'm going to say the Eagles, with the number one seed in the division still within reach, uber talented roster. And you know what travels really well, even across the country? Good trench play, which the Eagles do have on both sides of the line, and good quarterback play, which Jalen Hurts is a great quarterback. I'd say advantage Eagles there. So I'm going to go Eagles 33, Seahawks 27 in a good, entertaining game. I think the Seahawks will be competitive. But I think the Eagles have just the talent advantage. And you could argue, I know that the Seahawks are out of the playoff picture, but the Eagles might just be as desperate with, expectations and where they are now, that fan base. I mean, there's a lot riding for the Eagles. So I think just the edges kind of go towards the Eagles. But yeah, that spread I think is maybe a little generous, but I think the Seahawks will make it competitive.
I expect that there are going to be a few personnel changes by Pete Carroll. I just have a feeling that he has grown sick of the way things have gone the last month. And I think that those moves are going to have positive benefits for the Seahawks, just morale-wise, getting some guys in there. You mentioned buy-in. I don't know if that's really the big issue, but he's going to make some moves here to try to spark this team. The offense has been playing better. Geno Smith, I expect, is going to play in this game, and I think he's going to be healthy. Since they had the extra day, they gave him last week off. And I think this is a defense. The Eagles defense, you mentioned earlier, they're just not good. I mean, their front four is good. They can win games with their pass rush. But I think there are ways that you can scheme around that against this team. We'll see if Shane Waldron actually does it. But they've got major issues with their coverage. And their run defense, if you can get past the first level, again, that's a big if. But if you can get to those linebackers, the corners and safeties, this is a team that can have issues defending the run as well. This is a game that I think the Seahawks have a chance to put up enough points. I think the weather is going to play a factor in this game as well, looking at the forecast. This second week in a row, I wasn't able to quite get the upset I was expecting last week. But I think the Seahawks, they are the more desperate team, and I think they're going to play like it. The Eagles have some real issues that they are dealing with right now on defense. And I think the offense, they've been stumbling a little bit by their standards. I think the Seahawks are going to give them a good fight. In fact, I think that 3.5-point spread, I think the Seahawks are going to find a way to win this game with a 3-point victory, a really close game that goes down to the wire. And I think the Seahawks keep their slim playoff hopes alive with a much-needed win against an NFC foe, keep the Eagles stumbling a little bit. When a team like this comes in, Nick, if you can do some damage early and get off to a fast start, which the Seahawks have been better doing that than anything else offensively, those kind of teams tend to wilt. Can you get the Eagles into their own heads thinking, oh, no, here we go again? I think that first quarter is crucial. I think the Seahawks get off to a quick start, and that leads to a victory on Monday Night Football. As always, you can follow me on Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Nick on X at NickLee51. Make sure to subscribe and follow Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you don't miss a single episode. On Monday, we'll have our post-game show, Game Balls, 3 up, 3 down, key storylines, hopefully discussing a much-needed Seahawks victory. Thanks for listening in and enjoy the rest of your Friday. Go Hawks.